Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hello. I get asked frequently about what it is I do to build muscle and strength as a vegan. So I figured rather than just giving a basic explanation, I would go into detail about not only what I do, but also detailing my overall lifting philosophy. Not necessarily to serve as a guide for others, but hopefully to act as a source of inspiration to other people who may be new to the gym and want to see what worked for me, and then use the information I provide for whatever their fitness journey may be, and hopefully find some utility in it regardless of whether or not they're vegan. So this shouldn't be seen as like a video just for vegans. It's just about what I did as a vegan. So giving some background on myself so you guys know I'm not totally full of it. I don't actually work in the fitness industry. I have, but I am currently certified as a strength and conditioning specialist by the NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And I have had experience training both athletes and novice lifters. And I have found that even though I enjoy training with people with specialized goals, such as team athletes like rugby players and basketball players, the majority of people I have worked with are just regular people who don't work out or lift weights for a living. They're basically people who just want to reap some of the many benefits that come from resistance training, and I have found that many of the same training philosophies I have established for myself also work well for other people, especially people who may have some experience at the gym but don't really know what to do, considering the overwhelming amount of information that is out there. A lot of the information out there on training is indeed solid advice for certain people, but someone who has, say, only 6 months of training under their belt may not necessarily need to incorporate some advanced nonlinear periodization program into their routine, like Smolov. They just need to find ways to make the 45 minutes or so that they can afford to spend in the gym as fruitful and helpful as possible. So when studying fitness and programming, I really did not know where to begin since there were so many different programs that sent mixed messages. And through pure trial and error as well as research, I have found what worked best for me at the gym, and that's what I would like to share. So the first thing I did is that I had to establish a good training philosophy. So going back to when I started doing resistance training for real, I have been physically active most of my life, but strength training wasn't ever really my goal. Maybe I'd dink around with the Nautilus machines once or twice a week, and then some. But what I really was dedicated to in my early to late 20s was endurance sports, specifically distance running, and I was very good at it. It was very easy for me to run a half marathon in under an hour and 30 minutes. It wasn't uncommon for me to run a mile in under 6 minutes, and my physique was definitely not great, but that's not the reason why I got into endurance sports. I did it just because I love the sense of adventure, and if somebody wants to do distance running or any other kind of endurance sports, more power to them. If that makes them happy, by all means. But at my worst, I weighed about 140 pounds, even though I was 6'1". I was just burning so many calories. My body composition just couldn't keep up with it. And that wasn't a problem, but what really was a problem for me was when I got plantar fasciitis from overtraining. And I also had a hairline fracture on my tibia, which made training nearly impossible. And strength training in particular was excruciatingly painful. So I had to do several weeks of physical therapy. And after that, I decided that the best way to fortify my body would be to get more serious about resistance training because of all the wear and tear that distance running was causing. And as it turns out, after doing strength training for a while, I decided I enjoyed strength training so much, I decided to forsake distance running altogether. Maybe occasionally I'll run a 5K every now and then, but Other than that, I decided to just cut out distance running, and I decided to dedicate my time and training to developing strength. And this is where my training philosophy really began to blossom. I began to appreciate the true value of strength, and today I adhere to a philosophy that I believe in myself very strongly, and it's also something I recommend for other people, and that's the philosophy that strength is everything. People go to the gym for a large myriad of reasons. They may want to build muscle, they want to lose weight, they want to reduce their risk of injury, they want to improve their athletic performance. Well, guess what? None of that really matters. It shouldn't be a primary goal. Your goals should only serve as motivation for coming to the gym and giving it your all. They should almost never influence the way you train. So why is this? It's because really no matter what your goal is, you will never achieve that goal unless you are strong. And there is only one way to get strong, and that is applying resistance to the body using movements that utilize as many moving parts in the human body as possible using the movements that our body is designed for. I'm going to go over in detail what those movements are and how I train them, but regardless of your current level of fitness, it is my firm belief that if you're going to the gym and developing strength is not your primary motivation, then you are just wasting your time. So let's think about some of the goals that people usually have for going to the gym. You want to build muscle? Okay, great. Getting strong will allow you to apply more resistance to the skeletal muscle tissue, which will result in greater muscle fiber activation and increased cross-sectional diameter of the muscle fibers, so you'll get bigger. You want to lose weight? Great. Getting stronger will result in greater energy expenditure for every movement you do, including movement outside of the gym. You want to reduce your risk of injury? That was my primary motivation. Getting strong doesn't just build up your skeletal muscle strength, but it also increases bone mineral density, tendon, ligament, and cartilage strength so that there's less wear and tear on the body through everyday physical activity, whether it be at the gym or from physically engaging activities outside of the gym. Like I said, that was my primary motivation for transitioning from distance running into strength training, and I have been injury-free ever since. So, you may want to improve your performance with a sport. Okay, great. Get strong. Sports are a combination of skill and strength, and skill is developed through playing and practicing your sport. But if you were to say take two MMA fighters of equal skill and weight, then the stronger fighter is going to win every time, because stronger will mean you'll be able to generate a greater force output with every athletic movement you perform. And this goes for athletes of any sport that requires high intensity athletic movement. So that's going to be everything apart from like aerobic based endurance sports, like running or cycling. So I know I came across as kind of like a smug when talking about goals, but I do want to tell everybody, and I do think your goals are important, and I'm not trying to tell you that your reasons for going to the gym and working out are not valuable, but anything other than developing strength should be seen as a secondary goal, because if you're not strong, you will achieve nothing but disappointment. 90% of people who sign up for gym memberships end up quitting. And I think a big reason for that is because most of them don't end up getting strong because they waste their time doing bullshit and then lose motivation and quit and end up with a dad bod, a beer cut, and a wife who cheats on them. And, that's not for me. I imagine that's not what anybody wants. So that's just something I wanted to state. So when people tell me what their goals are typically, I don't even care. I mean, that's great and everything, but what you wish to do with the strength you develop in the gym is entirely up to you. But if you're at the gym, it should be for no other purpose than to develop strength, and how someone builds strength isn't going to vary from person to person based on their goals. The human organism is a bipedal creature which is designed for full body movements, and strengthening those movements will help you achieve your goals. So don't be a fitness snowflake and think your body has special fitness needs. The movements that benefit 99% of all other lifters will almost certainly benefit you as well. And learning those movements and then maximizing your strength through them should be your only concern. That'd be the only thing you concern yourself with at the gym. It may come across as crass and dogmatic for me to suggest what worked for me will work for everybody. But guess what? I am a human being just like you, so developing strength will benefit anyone the same way it benefited me. How you progress a strength movement might vary depending on factors like your body's morphology, but getting strong will still benefit you in every aspect of your life. So that's why strength is everything for me. So back when I first started, there was so much variety in the gym, I figured I would try a little bit of everything. And in the end, I ended up making no progress. And that's because I didn't understand the value of simplicity. So eventually, I realized that I was doing too much. And when it comes to developing skill and strength, you can't really be a jack of all trades unless mediocrity is your goal. So depending on the type of gym you go to, you're going to see a lot of equipment. Most of the stuff you see, I'll just be frank, is worthless bullshit. Gyms are ultimately a business trying to maximize profit, so they wouldn't want to fill up the gym with equipment that takes skill and a tremendous amount of effort to learn and develop, because then at least half of the members would quit after realizing that building strength isn't as easy as they thought it was. Because, these gyms, they don't care whether or not you make progress, they just care whether or not you stay. And if they can give people the impression that they're making progress, even if they're not, that's good enough, because then they'll keep their gym membership. So Building strength is not easy, and let's face it, almost nothing in life that is worthwhile, like saving your hair, is easy, but building strength is absolutely a simple endeavor. Building a strong body, it's not rocket science, and the only reason the industry tries to make figuring out what to do such an arcane dilemma is because it's hard to maintain clients long term when you can teach them everything that they need to know in the span of a few weeks using conventional lift. And I bring that up because, when I was working as a personal trainer, I actually got in trouble because I would tell people very useful advice. I'd tell them how to program for themselves, and I'd help them build a strength foundation within just a few weeks of training, and then they would be good to go. I mean, maybe people would stick with me if they just wanted to have me around for improved exercise adherence. But, gyms would say, you got to slow down the progression. You want to break it down further, make it more complex. Otherwise, they're not going to stick with you for very long. And that's why I probably wasn't a very successful personal trainer because, I trained with the idea of giving people results as fast and effectively as possible. And I wasn't really concerned with wasting their money. So if you're at a gym and you're doing a machine circuit for your legs at Planet Fitness, heaven forbid you're actually training at the gym, you may feel like you're getting a good workout because you're applying stress on individual muscles. But if you could dedicate a fraction of that time to doing just one movement like a barbell squat, which will not only train all of the same muscles, but train them to work together in coordination to produce a strong functional movement that is carry over to everyday activity, don't you think it would be a better use of your time to learn and perfect that one movement rather than try to isolate each muscle individually? That is the conclusion I came to. The muscles in the human body do not work in isolation, but rather function together intramuscularly through kinetic chains to produce movements. So when you're at the gym, you should always choose to train the movements that maximize the amount of skeletal muscles being utilized, like squats and deadlifts, rather than just apply stress to muscles individually. This will not only yield better strength results, since the more muscles involved will allow you to carry heavier loads throughout a greater range of motion, but they'll also save you a lot of time at the gym. So personally speaking, I see a lot of people at the gym who come to the gym nearly every day, and they spend their time doing bullshit pump and fluff programs. And in the years that they've been coming, they've made virtually no progress. So don't be like that. Just select a few good movements to train and try to get as good at them as possible, which leads me to my next point. And that point is that conventional training is best. And conventional training should be obvious in the picture I'm providing on the slide. But going into depth about my point, there are a lot of fun and interesting looking devices at gyms, like Bosu balls, body blades, agility ladders, those masturbation looking shake weights, those cute looking pink 1 pound dumbbells that you see gym bunnies using as they spend their 4 hours on the stair climber. However, none of these will work as well as training movements we have known for decades, if not centuries, to improve the human organism. Since ancient times, humans have realized the benefits of exercise. I'm talking about all the way back to the times of Plato and Homer. And that includes resistance training. So in the many centuries that have followed, we've established some basic conventional ideas about resistance training, such as training full body movements with high frequency and high intensity. We know this works because otherwise it wouldn't be considered conventional. In the past several decades, we've seen plenty of new pieces of equipment, and the look of gyms have changed, the equipment has changed, but none of that matters because the one thing that hasn't changed is the human organism, and no new gimmick or fitness fad will ever change the fact that we are human beings who best develop strength by doing movements that provide resistance to the structure of our muscular skeletal system. One thing charlatans and con artists discovered long ago is that it is much easier to sell a bullshit idea to somebody if you tell them something they wish to hear. That is why you have channels like Alpha Destiny who tell their viewers things like, oh, you can get great results if you do partial range of motion exercises, or that you don't need to do conventional lifts to get strong, even though conventional lifting is the only way to provide a maximum amount of resistance to the body while it moves through as great of a range of motion that our joints allow. So things like, above the knee rack pulls, Jefferson squats, and any partial range of motion exercises, they may work a little bit, but they will never be as effective as a conventional lift performed properly. And one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people who look really good and do those unconventional lifts, they already built a good strength foundation doing conventional lifts, so people shouldn't think that they got that big and strong and muscular doing unconventional lifts. They certainly built their strength foundation doing conventional training. So, unfortunately for me, I did a lot of unconventional lifting and was deceived by such charlatans early in my fitness journey, and I can safely say I made more progress doing conventional barbell lifts within 6 months than the 2 years I had spent wasting my time in the gym prior doing unconventional bullshit. So when we think about conventional lifts, what most experienced lifters will think of are the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. And those lifts are indeed conventional because they work. If they didn't work, they wouldn't be considered conventional, as I already said. However, as encompassing as these movements are at building strength, there are a few more movements I would throw into the conventional lifts, like the pull-up, the overhead press, the farmer's walks. And that is not to say that that other movements don't work or that nothing else should be considered conventional. But these 6 movements are the best for most of the population because not only do they work really well, and not only do they work the most moving parts of the human organism, but they can most easily be regressed or progressed depending on your strength and skill level, and they're also my personal favorites, and I do very little, if anything, outside of those main movements on most of the days of the week. So now I want to clarify. Now, conventional training does not mean the same thing as conventional equipment. Any kind of tool that provides resistance to the body as you perform full body compound movements will build strength. But what we most typically associate such training with barbell training because barbells are widely available at most gyms and they are a suitable option for almost everybody, but they are far from your only option. So even though they are not essential, I personally love doing conventional lifts with specialty bars. If you guys have seen some of my videos in the past, I use things like safety squat bars, Swiss bars, football bars, trap bars, things like that. And the reason why I do them is they improve my lifting adherence due to adding a new dynamic to a familiar lift. And they can help address weaknesses in a lift by changing the muscle's emphasis. So for example, if you're doing something like a safety bar squat, front squat, or Zercher squat, this will load the bar more anteriorly in the front and thus take some of the pressure off of your hips and put more emphasis on the spinal erectors due to the forward pull that forces you to extend the thoracic spine to maintain an upright posture. Or when I'm bench pressing, I'll use a football bar or a Swiss ball like I already mentioned to help improve my lockout since there's less eccentric loading on the pecs and more on the shoulders and triceps. So specialty bars are obscure and I would never say they're essential, but the underlying point is that training and movement can be done effectively provided you're using a piece of equipment that provides a sufficient amount of resistance and can be overloaded. And I'll get into progressive overload and programming a little bit later in this video. So one thing I think that's also very important to emphasize is that you should train movement and not muscle. So if you remember what I said earlier in this video, building muscle, reducing risk of injury, improving athletic performance, as well as improved mobility and health in general are all side effects of getting strong. So you should get strong because it helps with everything. However, getting strong is not just a matter of applying stress to the muscle. Otherwise, let's face it, isolation movements would work just as well as full body compound movements, and we know for a fact they don't. A muscle works intramuscularly with other muscles to produce movement, so you should never go to the gym with the idea of training, say, for example, your lats or quads. I used to do bro splits when I was at the gym, and I would find that I would spend, over an hour at the gym having only trained 1 or 2 body parts, which is just unacceptable considering the time economy I was afforded at the gym. Now, there is nothing at all wrong with building the muscles I mentioned, of course, but those muscles work more effectively in conjunction with other muscles through kinetic chains to produce strong movements that have everyday carryover. So if you're doing something like a hip thruster, you may feel a good burn in your gluteus maximus because you're doing the movement that the muscle is designed for, which is hip extension. But if you do something like a barbell squat, not only are you going to have hip extension, but you're also going to have dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, which works the calves. You're going to have knee flexion and knee extension, which works the hamstrings and quadriceps. You're going to have back extension and scapular retraction, which works the erector spinae, rhomboids, and latissimus dorsi, amongst other things. So simply put, by training a muscle within a movement, as opposed to just trying to isolate a muscle, is a much more effective way to train the body in a shorter period of time. That is not to say there is no place for isolation movements at the gym, especially not for bodybuilders, but if you want to do hip thrusters and biceps curls, by all means go ahead and do so, but they should serve as nothing more than assistance movements to apply more work to a muscle when you've reached a state of fatigue that doesn't allow you to continue training, to train a larger compound movement in an effective or safe way. So what I mean by that is that, let's say you're doing barbell squats and you're so fatigued you can't even squat like 50% of your 1 RM max anymore, but you want to get a little bit of additional work on your glutes, then in that case maybe something like a hip thruster would be useful. So that's a good use for isolation exercises, and I'll get more into that later in the video. But what exercises you inevitably choose to select are up to you. But no matter how I train or how you train, I always make sure of one thing. I always make sure of is that I train a movement at least 2 or 3 times per week, and that can be covered in a full body workout or a split. Although I usually prefer to do splits, since I like being able to dedicate all my energy in the gym to just a few movements at most per workout. So on average, I'm at the gym 4, sometimes 6 days a week, although that's uncommon. So, I'm talking a lot about movement, so I think it's only fair I provide some examples of what I'm talking about specifically. So a movement can encompass many different types of exercises. So here are push exercises. You have a bench press and an overhead press right here, but some other presses could include like dips, incline bench, dumbbell press. Those are all just example of pushing movements. And for pulls, you have like horizontal pulls, like the T-bar row, and you also have vertical pulls like the pull-up. They're both useful. If you're going to do pulls, you probably should try doing varieties of both, just to have a more encompassing workout and target more muscle groups. But they're both useful, and for other pulls, you can do like, low rows, there's pull-ups, chin-ups, T-bar rows, many other pulls besides what's just listed here. And, for some squat examples, here's a high bar squat. That's a very, very good high bar squat. And also you have a safety bar squat. That is like a more of a wide stance squat. That probably emphasizes the adductors a little bit more. The high bar squat being performed there is with a narrower squats, probably emphasizes the quadriceps a little bit more due to the greater range of motion. But, there's very many different variations of the squat. You have, high bar back squats, front squats, safety bar squats, Zercher squats, belt squats. I can go on and on. And another movement is the hinge movement, and a hinge movement can include like the barbell deadlift, trap bar deadlift, low bar back squat, good mornings. The thing about the hinges is that they train all the same muscles as a squat, except the emphasis is a little bit more on the posterior chain, and that's why I put the low bar squat in the category of the hinge, even though I do understand that is debatable. And another movement that I train specifically, but I don't think is necessary, are weighted carries. And the reason why weighted carries are important to me is because I think they're very good for developing grip strength as well as strength in the calves. So I think for a lot of people, they can be considered an assistance exercise because the muscles you're training are already going to be covered to an extent with the other movements you're doing, such as squats and hinges. But for me personally, I enjoy treating weighted carries as a main lift because they just benefit me so much. So you are by no means limited to just these movements, but by doing these movements, you can at least assure that you're developing full body strength in doing so using movements that we utilize in our daily lives, whether we take them for granted or not. So the most important facets of strength training, this is what I want to go over next. They are as followed. You have exercise selection, proper execution, and training frequency. So in building strength, rather than focus on programming or periodization, what I find the most useful was proper execution of a movement. Choosing the, and actually I should have put proper execution first, but anyways, choosing the right exercises and making sure I trained with as high a frequency as I could. So, no matter what program I have followed or currently follow, none of it is effective if I cannot at least perform movements correctly, choose the right exercise, and train with sufficient frequency. So I'm not going to go over rep set ranges as I don't think that is important, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the video. So for now, I think it's time to get into conventional training, and I'd like to start by talking about the most important facets of strength training. So exercise selection. There we go. Exercise selection refers to movements that you choose to train when you come to the gym. The good thing about having a simplified program of compound movements is that you don't have to choose that many exercises. You can have a full body workout, for instance, by simply doing 3 exercises like a squat, a bench press, and pull-ups. Or if you're training with a high frequency and want to prioritize body part recovery, you may choose to do a push-pull squat split, where on Monday, say you do a few push and pull movements, and the next day you do nothing but squats or some other hip-loaded movement like a deadlift. When I came to embrace a more streamlined approach towards exercise selection, I made substantial progress because rather than trying some new gimmick every week, I could spend every workout trying to perfect the same movement, and I figure that since conventional lifting is best for strength, why even bother with anything else if you don't have some sort of specialized goal like training a sport? Exercise selection is the most important component of a good training program because it really doesn't matter how much effort you put into something because it's not going to mean a thing if you're wasting your time doing bullshit like Zumba or CrossFit. I mean, if that is what you want to do, then don't even bother going to the gym. Just go to the club and dance without drinking alcohol and you'll have all the same benefits, but you'll probably have a lot more fun. So next, of course, is proper execution. So it's not enough to just select the right movements. You need to also know how to perform the movements with good form, and that is where proper execution comes in. Now, when I first started lifting, I didn't do very good form. However, the limitations that came from learning the movements more often than not related to my lack of skill and kinesthetic awareness rather than some type of muscular imbalance. Like, people bring up muscular imbalances a lot, because that's a good way to get you started on a program that delays progress by having you do a bunch of foamy rolling and stretchy bullshit. There's a lot of people who say they cannot squat, deadlift, or press, but the truth is that they're usually either lying or they can and they just don't know it. So very few people, short of people who recently had, say, reconstructive surgery, are incapable of performing conventional lifting. If you look at toddlers, even they know how to squat because the movement is literally built into our DNA. The problem is that as a consequence of our lifestyle, we gradually forget how to do the movement, but those movements absolutely can be relearned regardless of your age and fitness level, and the best way to learn those movements is to actually do those movements. So when I was training, the only movements I had issues with were squatting and hinging, but it had nothing to do with any sort of muscular imbalance. I mean, the notion of muscular imbalances in new lifters is ridiculous to me because, of course, they have muscular imbalances. It's because they're weak, and they need to basically correct those imbalances by getting strong. Contrary to popular belief, it's strength that determines mobility, not muscle length. And that is why you see a lot of women, when they come to the gym who do a lot of yoga, they can do full splits, but even with that amazing flexibility, they still can't even perform a proper barbell squat without their knees caving in that valgus position, since their glutes are so weak and they can't externally rotate their hips. So through training repetition and frequency, as well as getting external feedback from experienced lifters, I was able to develop the skill and body awareness to properly perform the conventional lifts, and I recommend anyone interested in conventional lifting actually seek out proper exercise instruction from a qualified fitness professional rather than just reading a guide online, and that includes this one too, because just because you read good advice doesn't mean you'll be able to follow said advice effectively, because your brain's ability to communicate with the body while training advanced athletic movements will initially be so poor, so it's important you get external feedback from someone who knows what they are talking about and who can cue you on what to do specifically as you develop your skill set. So in addition to choosing the right movements to train and learning proper form with them, the only other thing that matters after that is making sure you train those movements with enough frequency and volume so that you can actually benefit from it. So having spoken to many experienced lifters, the most common thing they'll tell you when they're discussing their pitfalls and things that are preventing them from continuing to build strength is a lack of consistency. High frequency can mean different things to different people, meaning someone who is more experienced lifting may be able to train 5 to 6 times a week without issues, but somebody who is new to training may only be able to handle 3 days per week tops. And that's fine. If you're new, 3 days a week may be high frequency, but if you're more experienced, you may need to train more frequently. And that's another way to overload, is by adding more frequency, and I'll get into that later. But I prefer high frequency and shorter workouts where I emphasize something as little as just one movement a day, like a squat or a deadlift. And especially if I'm doing something like a squat or a deadlift, because they're so neurologically taxing. But whatever the case, you just want to make sure you're training as frequently as you can while also putting emphasis into your recovery so that training doesn't become overtraining and your workouts do not become counterproductive. So this slide right here is basically just a source that shows that people who do train more frequently get better results, and that's just something you can review yourself, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm backing up my claim so people don't think I'm full of shit. So anyways, moving on from that. what I want to talk about is why I don't periodize. Now, this is a controversial subject because periodization is considered like the gold standard in the fitness industry. And indeed, before I even say anything, there are studies out there that I acknowledge that show people who periodize actually get better results than people who don't periodize. So why would I not periodize? I mean, it seems ridiculous considering that people get better results with it. So I wanted to explain that. So I have talked a lot about the principles that I have incorporated into my own workouts that have been effective. So now what I want to discuss are some of the things that I have tried that haven't been as effective for me. So that includes periodization. And I want to explain why I don't use it. So I think most people outside professional athletes or people who don't work out for a living really should not bother periodizing. And hear me out on this one. So for those who don't know what periodization is, it's the idea of training in cycles for the sake of achieving a long-term goal called a macro cycle. Now, in order to reach that goal, workout programs are divided up into mesocycles, which encompass usually around a month or so of training. And further down, you have microcycles, which cover week-to-week training. So the idea is to take a larger goal and break it up into smaller goals in order to achieve it, and that all sounds fine on paper. But the problem I have with periodization is there are too many acute variables that factor into our everyday lives that make long-term goal planning viable. So people who have real lives outside of the gym and have external stressors like their jobs, their kids, lack of sleeps, periods of poor eating habits, even genetics can play a role. These are all negative factors that can not only adversely influence our performance at the gym, but also be unpredictable and happen at the most unexpected times, which periodization programs really do not take into account. And that's because periodization programs are built for athletes who just work out for a living. So if all you're doing is resting outside of the gym, then it may be easy to follow a periodization program where stressors out to the side of the gym are not factored in. But if you've had a really stressful day at the office, or you spent all day gardening or doing landscaping, and then you go to the gym and it tells you need to do 10 sets of squats at 93% of your 1 rep max, then you may not feel like it and just blow off the entire workout. Or maybe you feel like you'd rather do a different rep set range than what the program recommends. And now you feel like you've fallen out of the program completely just because you didn't follow it to the letter. Periodization, in my opinion, is just another example of how fitness professionals make training more convoluted than it really needs to be. You know, as a regular lifter who doesn't lift for a living, you don't even need to set a long-term goal because chances are you're not training for anything that would mandate it. You're not training for like some sports contract or anything. You just want to be able to do as well as you can. So don't worry about factors like RM percentages, reps, sets, and whatnot. When you see strong lifters, they're not strong because they train at a specific rep or set range or a certain RM percentage. They're strong because they go to the gym frequently and they work out hard with good form, and that is all you should concern yourself with. If there were some specific rep or set or RM percentage that was ideal for strength, then let's face it, everybody would use it. So what I recommend and what I do for myself is, just go to the gym, work out as hard as you can, and make sure you put emphasis on recovery. So that doesn't mean recovering arbitrarily, but just take as much time off as you need so that your performance doesn't suffer too greatly. So make training a day-to-day thing, since our day-to-day lives influence our performance at the gym. So if you'd rather do more reps with less weight one day, that is fine. There are many programs out there that are popular, like Smolov, Strongless 5x5 starting strength. And even though I don't want to give any credit to Mark Rippletit, since he's a moron who thinks that low bar squat has better carryover into Olympic weightlifting than the high bar squat and recommends new lifters chug down like 2,000 calorie shakes, all of these programs have the potential to work for you, and you can do any of them and make progress on the condition that you're implementing one of the most important things when it comes to training. And that concept is called progressive overload. So all the programs I mentioned incorporate progressive overload. So let's go ahead and talk about progressive overload. So progressive overload is the idea of adding a new variable to a workout program that makes it more challenging after adapting to previous challenges. I mean, this can be expressed through sets, rep ranges, intensity, and frequency. Ultimately, building strength is a matter of applying sufficient workloads to the human movement system so that it can handle more loads and produce more force. So rather than periodizing, just try to do something every workout that makes the lift a little bit more challenging. Say you're doing a 8x3 barbell bench, and on the final set you hit only 100 kilos after hitting 120 kilos on the first several sets before having to drop down due to diminishing returns. So next workout you can try to do an extra set while remaining at 100 kilos, so you can try to add an extra rep to every set while keeping the weight as close to your previous max as possible. If you train this way for the next several workouts and then find you're able to do 100 kilos for 4 reps on your final set, then you will have successfully overloaded since you are applying more work to the muscles you are putting resistance on, and then you can go back down to 3 reps and try doing more weight. So whichever you choose, it doesn't matter. Add more reps, add more weight, add more sets. Anything that makes the lift more challenging that you complete successfully will result in a gradual buildup of strength. So before you can overload, you need to adapt first. And how quickly you adapt is going to be based on factors like genetics and how trained you are, as new lifters tend to make progress very quickly during the first 6 months due to neuromuscular strength gains, where they simply get stronger as a result of training their nervous system to move an external source of resistance more efficiently. A more experienced lifter will take much longer to progress once they've gotten close to their genetic limit, and overloading will require more frequency and more overall work in the gym in order to make it happen. So basically, no matter how much experience you have at the gym, progressive overload can be expressed through any factor that makes your workout more challenging. So if you're training on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, you can design your workouts to include factors like more reps, more workout sessions, more reps, or greater intensity. In the past years of training, I have never followed any periodization program. I just go to the gym and do whatever I want to or feel like doing, and the only guidelines I stick to is training the right movements, training them hard, and training them frequently, and you don't need any rep or set guideline to achieve that. You just need progressive overload, so don't worry about what rep set range you should be doing. If there was some special set rep range that worked for everybody, then everybody would do it, as I already said, but it's not that simple, unfortunately. Just go to the gym, work out hard, and try to incorporate new challenges that provide more stimuli to your muscle compared to before, that allow you to adapt to greater workloads, and make sure you put enough emphasis on your recovery so you can get the most out of your workout. Any program that tells people they need to work a specific number of days or do a specific number of rep sets in order to optimize training and recovery is dishonest, since stress on the body, be it from training at the gym or stressors outside of the gym, affect people at different levels of severity. And our ability to deal with that stress is going to be based on factors like genetics, training history, age, diet, sleep, and far too many other things for me to recommend any kind of ideal training program. But a few things to keep in mind when you are designing a strength training program for yourself. Okay, so some of the variables I use when training is that even though I talked about rep set range not being terribly important, there is strong evidence that more intensity is typically better for strength. So the human energy systems are capable of generating much more force within the first 6 to 10 seconds of high intensity activity, because our skeletal muscles will utilize baseline ATP stores before relying on stored muscle glycogen for energy. So once ATP stores are depleted, our body will rely on stored muscle glycogen to generate more ATP through fast glycolysis. But this isn't as efficient as just using ATP our body has already stored. Therefore, heavier loads and greater force outputs happen within the first several reps. So a program where you are training 3 reps at a time at 95% of your 1RM max will probably be better for strength than just training at 10 reps at 75% of your 1RM max, even if the total volume is lower, just because of the way you're utilizing energy systems. Now, that is not to suggest that there is no place for higher volume training. Higher volume training can still build strength, and it is a way to maximize high frequency, since fatigue and muscle soreness can make proper execution of very high intensity movements difficult, if not dangerous, if you're doing it over a prolonged period of time. But having lighter, higher rep days is a good way to maintain a high frequency while also refining your technique. So if you're new to training, most of the strength aids you will get come from the nervous system. So you should probably do higher rep training to start, because you're going to get stronger no matter what, and doing more reps is a good way to reinforce good form through repetition. So doing any rep set range will build strength provided you incorporate progressive overload, but maximizing use of the phosphagen system, which is the energy system our body prefers to use first when we're using baseline APT stores, will do more for training the body to handle heavier workloads. So I have a source for that right here, and if you look at the bold area of this abstract, it shows that heavy load training is superior for maximizing strength and adaptations, even though both work. But this study shows that using higher intensity is overall more effective. But that doesn't mean you should use it exclusively, of course, as I already explained. So, anyways, going back to the next training variable I talk about, all right, and what I use is that This goes back to the whole frequency I was talking about, is that bare minimum, you want to train a movement at least twice per week and preferably more. So whether or not you're doing a split or a full body routine, like I said, that's up to you. And I like to do an upper lower body split. But if you're going to be doing something like a lower upper body split, you'll probably want to train with more frequency. Muscle protein synthesis tends to reach its peak after 48 to 72 hours. And additionally, taking too much time off from training a movement, even just several days, can make it harder for our nervous system to stay attenuated to that movement. So we get sluggish again. So deloading is emphasized a lot in training programs, and it certainly has its use, but generally speaking, taking long breaks is a bad idea. That is not to suggest overtraining isn't a real thing. I mean, it certainly is, but undertraining is a far more prevalent problem. So if you feel you need more than 3 days to recover from a high-intensity movement, then likely there is something wrong with your form, your sleep pattern, or you're not getting enough calories. So fix that rather than deloading first, and see if that fixes the problem rather than taking a week off. So next point I want to bring up is that you don't need to spend a half of your workout warming up. And this drives me crazy because, I see people spending more time warming up than they do actually working out. So more and more people, they're spending 30 minutes working out, doing static stretches, dynamic stretches, foam rolling, light plyometrics, jumping jacks, box jumps, all in preparation for a few basic strength movements. Really, your warm-up should not be that extensive. It should not last more than like 5 or 10 minutes, and it should focus on just a couple things. One, raising your body temperature up to improve blood flow and muscle elasticity, and you can do that with any kind of a general warm-up on a piece of cardiovascular equipment. And the second important thing is attenuating your nervous system for the movement you're about to perform. So a time economy is a factor for most people at the gym. So the more time you spend dicking around with foam rollers, yoga mats, and SMR sticks, the less time you're going to have doing the stuff that is actually going to get you stronger. Do a simple 3 to 5 minute warm up on any piece of a cardiovascular equipment, and then warm up specifically with the movement you're going to train using lighter loads in preparation for your heavier active sets. Me, I like to personally do the heavier loads early in the workout, so I'll do like 2 to 3 warm-up sets, starting with an empty bar and then leading up to about 60 to 70% of my first active set, and then I'll do one more rep at about 85 to 90% of the weight I'm going to do for my first active set. So by the time I am under the barbell, even if I'm starting with a heavier load, I feel warm, confident, and ready. So should you stretch tight muscles? That depends. Is it getting in the way of you being able to properly perform an exercise, such as if you have like tight calves that inhibit dorsiflexion of the squat? Then in that case, go ahead and do some static stretches, do some dynamic stretches, do whatever you need to do. But if your muscle tightness isn't getting in the way of you being able to properly perform an exercise, don't bother with stretching. Besides, training a movement through a full range of motion will give you all the flexibility benefits you need, and it is strength where mobility is derived from predominantly, not muscle length. So if you want to improve your mobility, spend less time stretching and spend more time lifting weights and getting strong. So you should always maximize your range of motion, no matter what, and how deep you go is going to be dependent on appendage length, joint morphology, and overall anthropometry. So even though your ass may not be as low to the floor as Periodization when you squat, that doesn't mean you're not doing a full range of motion. I talked about strength being a product of applying work to a movement, and work is expressed as force over distance. So the force part is pretty easy to understand, since if you add more weight, there will be more force, rotational force around the joint. But the distance part is a part that a lot of people want to pretend isn't that important. So by limiting the range of motion on any exercise, you're going to be involving fewer muscles and applying less work to them. So someone who curtsies with 200 kilos on their back isn't going to be applying as much work to someone who squats 120 kilos with a full range of motion. And additionally, the quarter squatter isn't going to be involving as many muscles, since many muscles will still be shortened during the concentric phase of the lift, like the hip extensors, hamstrings, and the knee extensors. So like I said, people who talk about partial range of motion as if it's an effective means of training are popular because they tell people what they want to hear. But the way you take the red pill on fitness is you have to understand that you can't half-ass an exercise and expect to make gains. So do a full range of motion. The people who say that they can't go all the way down with any movement usually can, but they just aren't willing to suck it up and use lighter loads because of ego. Moving on to Olympic lifts and plyometrics. And I'm talking from personal experience here, having trained these lifts and also having coach other people how to do these lifts, and I want to talk about why I don't do Olympic lifts or plyometrics without dogging on them too much. So for some reason, likely due to the popularity of CrossFit, we have seen a resurgence in popularity with the Olympic lifts as well as plyometrics. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with Olympic lifts and plyometrics provided they're executed properly, but I personally do not like to do them. I have trained them before in the past, and frankly, I suck at them. The most I've ever snatched is 185 pounds, but the fact that I do suck at them is not the reason I don't train them. Rather, it's because I no more need to do them to develop strength than I would need to play football in order to develop strength. These movements are extremely technical and power driven, and developing explosiveness is probably the most arduous and difficult aspect of fitness one can train. So anyone who would even consider training the Olympic lift should at bare minimum have several years of experience with a squat, and even then there are going to be non-trainable factors that determine effective execution of the Olympic lifts and plyometrics, such as fast twitch muscle fiber composition and muscle fiber excitability. And an individual who is a novice at the squat can train it regularly for a year and easily put on like 20 to 30 kilograms on his squat max. But conversely, somebody can train plyometrics for a year and maybe add just a couple of inches to their vertical jump, and the threshold is much more limited compared to just regular strength training. And, here's a source for that right here that showed that, athletes who just did regular strength training exhibited consistently large magnitude changes to lower body strength measures, which contrasted with the generally trivially small and moderate magnitude training improvements of power training upon lower body strength, sprint, and jump measures, respectively. So, Olympic lifting, I consider that more of a demonstration of power, and power is a component of work over time, and work is a product of force over distance. So improving your force output through movements like the squat will certainly improve your Olympic lifts, but the limiting factors for Olympic lifts are mostly skill and speed, both of which are trainable, but not nearly as much so as just training for strength. So Olympic lifts are fine. I like them. They're fun. They're cool looking. And if you really want to learn them, that's fine, but understand that a large portion of your time and training efforts will be dedicated to perfecting technique and speed. And if you have limited time economy and you want to just get as strong as possible, then it's probably better that you utilize your time just further perfecting conventional strength training. Elliptic limping and explosive sports are all great demonstrations of strength and power, and people who are in such sports absolutely should get as strong as they can. But if you are not interested in said sport, then there's no point in spending any time developing a skill set for something that you're not going to get very much benefit from. So I want to talk about assistance exercises. Now, assistance exercises, they should never take up the bulk of your workout, and what they are and what they should be used for is what I want to talk about. So anyways, assistance exercises are movements that should be used to help improve your performance with your major exercises, as well as help correct weak points in the major lifts. So an example of that would be to do bicep curls to fortify the bicep tendon for stronger movements like the deadlift and the pull-up in order to help reduce your risk of a bicep tear. So they should also be used to further emphasize parts of the body that are not very well covered by the major movements, but still might be important to train based on an individual's goals, such as, combat athletes who may want to strengthen their neck to better fortify themselves against blows. So in any case, assistance exercise should be performed after the major compound lifts and with greater rep range and lower intensity compared to the main lifts, simply due to the fact that you're going to have less structural support with assistance exercises and thus won't be able to handle extremely heavy loads with the same degree of safety. So I'd say pushing for 6 to 12 reps is a good goal to go for, since you still can easily apply overload within that rep range. So other than neck training, one thing I like to incorporate as an assistance movement into my routine is ab work. I'm talking direct ab work. And the reason why is because the rectus abdominis is a spinal flexor. And sadly, there aren't too many strength-based movements that involve spinal flexion. Spinal stability and spinal extension is well covered by the main lifts, but for training spinal flexion, you want to incorporate some abdominal exercises. Now, the problem with a lot of abdominal exercises is that, quite frankly, most of them are bullshit and they get too easy too quickly, and you end up doing so many damn reps, it becomes more of a cardiovascular exercise than a strength exercise. So much better than something like a crunch or a leg raise would be an ab wheel. Now, the ab wheel is great. Training the ab wheel it makes ab training feel more like a strength workout and like the big lifts. And it is very easy to progress with it no matter what variation you're doing, because you're always going to be forced to flex your spine using much more body weight compared to other exercises. And you can change the vector angle of your body to make it more difficult. So for example, with exercise progression with the ab wheel, what I would do is that I would start with my knees on the floor, and I couldn't go all the way down at first without collapsing, so I used the wall to limit my range of motion until I got stronger. So eventually I was able to do a full range of motion for 20 reps. So to make it more difficult, I did the ab wheel with my knees extended with a full range of motion using my full body weight. This was very difficult, and I can do only about 10 reps or so per set max, but nothing I've ever done comes close to targeting my abs directly as the ab wheel. So one thing I do want to point out is that I see a lot of people dedicate their entire workouts to just doing ab training when you could get all the benefits from just doing the ab wheel. Like, the abs are not some complex muscle that requires hours of dedication per day. You just need to find some way to apply resistance to them as you do the movement the muscle is designed for, which is spinal flexion. And the ab wheel, in my opinion, is the best thing out there. Better than leg raises, better than crunch, better than anything. So I figure that since I talk a lot about periodization, why I don't think it's useful, I figure a lot of people are going to be curious about how it is I specifically program for myself. And what you see before you is basically just a template, something I use to keep myself accountable and also to record the movements I'm training. And as you can see, with the exception of the hip hinge, which I'm going to get into a little bit later to justify my reasons why, I train most of these movements at least twice per week. And this is usually this is an example of a pretty moderate workout for me. Sometimes I'll do a little bit more, sometimes I'll do a little bit less. Now you'll notice that I have the rep and set range on, like the 4x8. The first number refers to the number of sets, and the latter number refers to the number of reps that I'm going to be doing. However, that may seem pretty random, and that usually is because I really do whatever the hell it is I feel like when I go to the gym, and I don't feel it's really necessary to get a certain rep or set range down, just so long as I'm training the movement and doing it effectively. It's like I've said many times before, like, somebody who you see at the gym is not strong because they're training at a certain rep or set range, or they're training at a certain percentage of their RM. They're strong because they go to the gym and they work hard and they train frequently and they do the exercises with good form, and that's all I try to focus on. I just want to make sure I'm training the movements frequently and I'm training it with enough intensity, be it at higher rep range or a higher set range, that I'm getting a challenge and that I can successfully overload. So on some days I may choose to challenge myself with a higher rep range, and on some days I may choose to challenge myself by adding more weight. It's all based on what I feel like doing. And, and frankly, I feel it gives me better exercise adherence, because if I'm going to be sticking to some dogmatic program that tells me I have to train a specific way, I may just say fuck it and not feel like it. So anyways, what you see here is basically just a push-pull squat split. Like on Monday, I'm going to be doing two different variations, or actually just like basically a push and a pull, and then I'll be doing maybe some farmer's walks towards the end, and I'll do ab wheels in between. So that's a pretty light day, and the reason why I start off pretty easy on Monday is because on the previous day, on Sunday, that's when I'm doing barbell deadlifts, and as far as like the nervous system goes, I find deadlifts to be the most neurologically taxing exercise that you can do, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you don't really have any stretch reflex with the deadlift. You have to do everything from a dead start, and you have to lift a tremendous amount of weight, so it's a very difficult exercise to recover from. So on days when I do deadlifts, maybe I'll just do some farmer walks afterwards, and that's it. I'll call it a day. So on the next day, I want to avoid doing anything hip related. Like, I'm not going to do squats the next day. I'll just do upper body. And then on Tuesday, that's when I'll go ahead and do squats again. And, right here I have safety bar squats listed, but you can do any variation of a squat. Like I said, you want to train movement first and foremost, and how you train that movement, whether it be with a safety bar, a kettlebell, if you're doing goblet squats, a barbell, it doesn't matter, just so long as it's something that can be overloaded. And then, I do have bicep curls listed here, but that's not like, specific or scientific at all. It's just that, I may feel like doing bicep curls afterwards. And, if you feel like doing something, why the hell not? And on that note, I should note that this isn't necessarily going to be the only stuff I do at the gym, but this is rather just to keep me accountable and make sure I'm training all the movements with a sufficient amount of volume and a sufficient amount of frequency. So I'll take a rest day on Wednesday to let my nervous system recover. And then on Thursday, that's when I'll do a little bit more of a thorough workout, and I'll do multiple versions of a press, multiple versions of a pull, you see a football bar bench press listed here. And, like I said earlier, I like training with specialty bars because I think they just add fun factor and they reduce the monotony of the gym a little bit. And they also help me with like specific weaknesses of a certain lift, like the football bar, as well as the overhead press. Those really put emphasis on the triceps, so that helps work on my lockout a little bit more. And I'll be doing unweighted pull-ups as opposed to weighted pull-ups on Thursday because I feel with like unweighted pull-ups I can get a lot more volume in, and I just get it doesn't really matter whether or not you get a pump, but I feel I get a lot more edema, and that just builds my confidence. And also I try to include a horizontal pull as well, so I can target the rhomboids and other parts of the upper back, just because it gives me the feeling like I'm doing a more all-encompassing workout. And then like these are kind of afterthoughts, but I'll go ahead and do ab wheel again. I'll do some bicep curls, and then on Friday I'll do, just one movement, a back squat. And, there's a place for other lower body movements at the gym. I mean, you can do unilateral training, and that might be important if you're an athlete and you have to do a lot of running, like sprinting uphill or sprinting on a football field or wherever you may be training. But for me, I'm just training for strength. So doing bilateral strong movements is really all I need to do as far as developing my legs go. Now, from a cosmetic standpoint, there's probably other things I could do to improve my physique, like maybe I can do some like calf work and direct calf work, but frankly I just don't give a damn about that. I just want to get strong at the squat. I feel that covers all the body parts I want to build right now. Yes, I have skinny calves, but frankly in the past, having trained calves extensively, I get barely any hypertrophy, so the amount of effort is just not worth it for me. So then I'll take a rest day on Saturday, and that will basically conclude my week. So I think programming is important in the sense that it gives you a sense of accountability and it lets you record your progress, but I do not periodize because I don't think it's necessary. I think it's too convoluted. I want to go ahead and go over some of the mistakes that people make at the gym, and these are there's way too many to go over in just one video, so I just want to go over some of the more common mistakes. And the most common mistake, I think, and this is I call this kind of like the weight loss paradox, because, about 93% of people go to the gym to lose weight, but out of those people, maybe only about 5% will actually lose weight. And that's because people put way too much emphasis on weight loss. Now, weight loss is something that absolutely can happen with resistance training, but if you're going to the gym with weight loss as being your only goal, then you're going to be setting yourself up for failure. Compared to our basal metabolism, exercise really does not burn that many calories. You can have a really intense workout in 1 hour and have only burned maybe an additional 400 calories, which is the equivalent of a couple soft drinks. And there's some people who drink 6 soft drinks a day. So additionally, exercise stimulates appetite, which makes many people think that they can reward themselves with food. So if exercise played such a huge role in weight loss, then I have to ask, why is the majority of people in the world are not obese, yet the majority of people also don't exercise regularly? There is some overlap, obviously, between exercise and weight loss, but weight loss is more in the realm of a registered dietitian and even a psychologist, because, let's face it, people get really fat are likely to have some mental health issues like an eating disorder that is well beyond the scope of practice of anyone in the fitness industry. So weight loss is an admirable goal, which should be encouraged, but fitness should not be your primary, secondary, or even tertiary means of getting there. So that being said, another thing I want to point out is that, not everybody needs to be doing cardiovascular training, but you probably still should do cardiovascular training. And then the reason why I say that is because cardiovascular training is obviously good for the heart, lungs, and the muscles that assist with breathing, like the diaphragm, the scalene, the intercostal muscles. And it's also very good for people who have issues like type 2 diabetes due to cardio's role in improving insulin sensitivity and for improving blood lipid levels in people who are hypertensive. Now, cardio is great for our health, but is not necessarily an essential component of a fitness program unless you're an endurance athlete. So any kind of training, be it aerobic or anaerobic, is going to apply stress to the body, which is a good thing because adapting to stress is how our bodies get stronger, but it also means we have to choose wisely what type of training we want to put our body through. So for general health purposes, we really don't need to do that much cardio. I mean, you see people who look like withered twigs wasting away on the stair climber for hours, but evidence suggests that even 15 to 30 minutes of cardio a few times per week can give you much of the same benefits of cardiovascular training that people who train more frequently get. So a lot of people hate cardio and won't do it, but I think that is because many people think they need far more cardio than they really do need. So If you're a strength athlete, the best type of cardio you can do is swimming. I mean, we weigh about 60% less when submerged midway up our torso, so that means lower impact training, which gives our joints and connective tissue a break. And additionally, swimming provides full body resistance as opposed to something like a stationary cycle where much of our body is supported. So personally speaking, I find swimming a lot more fun and easier to incorporate once or twice per week into a strength training program, since it does definitely spare my joints. So another thing I want to talk about is lifestyle outside of the gym. So this is another thing that goes back to why I think periodization is not really something that I recommend for most people, because stress is cumulative, and stress outside of the gym may not feel as the same as stress caused by like your job or your personal life or your married life, but it still accumulates all the same, which is bad because your body can only handle so much stress. So what stress does is that stress can cause the release of cortisol, which has anti-inflammatory properties, but it is also catabolic. So whenever you work out, you create micro tears in your skeletal muscle, which then heal and get stronger with the release of anabolic growth factors from the endocrine system. However, if you are under constant stress, your cortisol levels will be elevated, making recovery more difficult, as well as just reducing mental well-being, which may make you want to blow off the gym altogether. So whatever you need to do to reduce daily stress in your life outside of using things like drugs and alcohol, make sure you do that, because going to the gym and feeling like absolute shit before you even hit the weights is probably going to translate into a very shitty workout. So sleep, and this goes into the whole lifestyle outside of the gym. So skipping sleep is absolutely unacceptable. If you're trying to get strong, skeletal muscle is linked directly to the nervous system, which we have somatic control over. So lack of sleep will mean nervous system fatigue, which many will try to counter through the use of stimulants like caffeine. Now, caffeine is not necessarily bad, especially for weight loss, since it has an appetite suppressing and lipolytic effect on the body, but over-reliance on it will build up a tolerance, and eventually energy levels will plummet dramatically if sleep is not resolved, since eventually caffeine will just stop working due to the ridiculous amount of tolerance we build up. So unless we're using 800 milligrams of caffeine per day, it's not going to do shit. So you should try to get at least 8 hours of sleep every night. If you're working on a job that demands so much of you that you can't even get 8 hours of sleep, then you probably should consider another career, one that doesn't require as much of a time devotion. Now, that is a subject for another video perhaps, but I used to live that lifestyle where all I did was work, eat, and maybe sleep if I were lucky, and my health suffered dramatically because of it. I made good money, but you can't put a price tag on my health. So if any job or lifestyle practice takes away from my ability to sleep 8 hours a night, then it is unacceptable. Sleep is non-negotiable because my brain needs to recover, so definitely keep that in mind. So another thing I want to talk about, which is a common mistake, is stop fearing carbohydrates. I'm not just saying this because I'm a vegan, because you can be on a low carbohydrate diet if you're a vegan as well. But let me just say, diet is the subject I dread talking about the most, because it's so personal for many people, and nobody wants to be told that what they're doing is wrong. But I'm not here to feed anyone's confirmation bias. And it's not my specialty, since I'm not a registered dietitian, but I do think it's important to at least address this one dietary issue, since it's an extremely common problem that is growing thanks to social media, much like the anti-vax movement. So there are a lot of carb-phobic, low-carb diets that have been popular throughout the years. Like you have the Atkins diet, the Zone diet, the Paleo diet, the Whole30 diet. But the low-carb flavor of the month that is popular today is the ketogenic diet, which at least 50% of the population on the planet seems to be on, at least here in the United States. So there are definitely some therapeutic uses for the ketogenic diet and can be good for weight loss, but I am talking about the ketogenic diet in the context of athletic performance, and in that regard, it is vastly inferior to a healthy diet which includes carbohydrates. Yes, that is true. Carbohydrates absolutely shit all over fat as an energy resource. So, for one, fat cannot be utilized anaerobically. Fat is an oxidative energy resource, which means that it is used mostly at rest and for lower intensity, longer duration exercises like distance running and aerobics in general. So, when broken down, a fat molecule will in fact generate more ATP than a glucose or glycogen molecule, but the glycogen and glucose molecules generate ATP at a much faster rate, making it more suitable for higher intensity activity. Additionally, Carbohydrates are a more efficient energy resource than fats because they are the only fuel source that can be stored directly into the skeletal muscle other than ATP. They can be stored as glycogen, which make them readily available for high-intensity, strength-based movements. So high-intensity sports utilize the fast-twitch type 2 muscle fibers, of which there are 2 types, but both are not very mitochondrial dense and thus cannot utilize oxidative enzymes and oxygen very effectively. So low-intensity endurance sports utilize the slow-twitch muscle fibers, which are more mitochondrial dense and thus respond to oxygen better. Now, the ketogenic diet appeals to a lot of people because of the weight loss benefits. And yes, keto diets can help with weight loss since fat is very satiating, which causes people to eat less. But people don't realize that these people who are losing weight are not very physically active and are just looking for a lazy, easy way to lose weight and couldn't care less about things like building strength and muscle. If you want to build muscle and strength, then you want carbs and protein in your diet, not only because it's our body's preferred fuel source that generates ATP far more effectively and faster than fat, but also because it is protein retentive, and that's what I want to show this study for. Our body needs glucose whether we eat it or not. So in absence of dietary glucose, our body will, in fact, convert protein into glucose via gluconeogenesis, which is a terrible, terrible waste since it's much better to let protein be spared and used for the repair and resynthesis of muscle tissue after a high-intensity exercise, and that will only happen if the body has carbs. So, you hear a lot of people, they talk about, how much protein you need and everything, and, most guidelines will suggest anywhere from as low as 1 gram to kilogram to as high as 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. You see some ridiculous supplement companies try to sell you on things like a 2 grams per pound of body weight, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And that's because, they want to sell you their supplements because, there's no way to get that kind of protein in your diet without supplements. But when people are actually calculating their protein needs, they have to consider how much of that protein is actually being utilized for what protein is meant to be utilized for, which is the repair and resynthesis of muscle tissue. So if you're having carbohydrates in your diet, then that's great. That means that your body's going to use carbohydrates as an energy resource rather than converting protein into carbohydrates through gluconeogenesis. And the abstract of the study I'm linking, you can read the whole study if you want, does show that carbohydrates do in fact have a protein retentive effect, and therefore if you want to utilize protein more effectively, you want to make sure you actually do in fact have carbohydrates in your diet. Now, one thing I will say about macronutrients beyond that is that, people rightfully rejected the fat hysteria in the 90s. I mean, fat is absolutely an essential nutrient, and it has many uses in the body, such as it's good for energy, of course, especially for oxidative based activities, and it's good for absorbing vitamins and minerals. But unfortunately, in our rejection of the fat hysteria, the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction to the point where people are so scared of carbs, they are now convinced that eating oatmeal and blueberries is the same as drinking a fucking Mountain Dew. You'll hear people talk about their improved blood lipid profiles or insulin sensitivity upon starting keto and losing weight, but that doesn't really mean anything since losing weight will cause such things to improve regardless of how shitty someone's diet is. Even someone eating just McDonald's who loses weight will likely see improved blood lipids. So let's not use weight loss as the only metric for determining a healthy diet, or else we might as well just start suggesting everybody start snorting cocaine to lose weight, since cocaine is probably the most effective appetite suppressant out there. So don't fear carbs, don't fear fat, don't fear any macronutrient. Yes, there are athletes out there who follow a low-carb diet and are still successful, but there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that their performance would be any worse if they were on a regular macronutrient-balanced diet that includes carbohydrates, and that's regardless of whether or not you're a vegan. So, anyways, So in conclusion, this is a very, very long video, and I did stumble a little bit. So if there's something that wasn't clear, if I stumbled in my notes, just please let me know, and I'll be happy to clarify it as much as possible. Or if you have any other questions, you can ask those as well. But if you are still here, I do want to thank you for sitting through this very long video. I sincerely hope it was informative, and I wanted to create it not necessarily as a guideline for vegans and non-vegan lifters, but rather to show that a vegan such as myself, following common sense strength training guidelines, certainly can build muscle and strength just as I did. So Other than abstaining from animal products, I did not have to make any lifestyle adjustments or have any special training protocols. I just ate enough calories, balanced my macronutrients, and worked hard as everyone else needs to do if they want to build strength and muscle. So transitioning from endurance-based cardiovascular training into strength training was a decision that has benefited my life in every aspect. And frankly, my only regret is I didn't start it sooner, much like with the fight against hair loss. So in any case, how you choose to pursue your fitness journey is entirely up to you. And if my personal experiences have provided you with any education or motivation whatsoever, then I know that this video has served its purpose. So thank you again, and I hope you guys are enjoying your quality leisure time. I'll be back with more content soon.